Room Service is a fabulous episode of Frasier. This is the 15th episode of the 5th season. It's directed by David Lee, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And it's quite an interesting experience for me, just as an aside, because I have literally, just before watching this, so about half an hour ago, watched an episode of Cheers, How to Win Friends and Electrocute People, that focuses quite a lot on Lilith and Frasier. So to then have this episode immediately after actually kind of makes me a little upset, because I think Frasier and Lilith, on the surface, are great together. This episode starts off with Frasier down at KCL, and he's on a call, and Roz needs to go pee. So she leaves. She can't wait for Frasier to be off the air, so she goes, and she bumps into Lilith. And Lilith goes into the booth, into Roz's booth, and Frasier is signing off and says, "and good mental," and then screams as he sees her, and I just thought it was brilliant. Initially, Lilith pretends that she's there for a conference, and then she starts crying. Brian, her husband, left her for a man, and Frasier comforts her, and it's a really sweet moment, and I like the fact not only that he was willing to comfort her, but that in her time of need, she turned to him, and I thought that was really sweet. We're then down at Cafe Nervosa. Niles finds out about Lilith, and he's not exactly happy Frasier invited her to the Union Club that night, but nevertheless, he has bigger problems, namely the fact that he's developed narcolepsy in response to stress, the stress of the divorce. And I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know stress-induced narcolepsy was a thing. So I did some Googling. I learned some things. That was pretty cool. And we're then in the apartment. Martin is teaching Eddie to roll over, which was very, very cute. And then the doorbell rings. And Martin and Daphne run. They scarf her. They don't want to be in the room with Lilith. Martin drops his cane. It was a delightful scene. And then Frasier opens the door. And there is Lilith, wearing quite revealing clothing. She looks beautiful, really gorgeous dress. And then she removes a layer, and we see this beautiful backless dress, absolutely gorgeous. And Frasier is clearly going to struggle with this one. And also her hair. I don't know if this was in previous appearances of Lilith, but her hair seems to have a red tint to it when the light shines, which, again, as I said, I have just before this watched an episode of Cheers with Lilith. So it's quite interesting to see these changes, and I rather enjoyed that. And Frasier asks Niles in the kitchen to help him repel Lilith, and then we cut to the following morning. Lilith is in bed with somebody. Obviously it's Frasier, except no, it isn't. It's Niles. And before they can really work out what they're going to do, there's a knock at the door. It's room service, no problem. And then there's another knock at the door, and it's Frasier. And this is something, it's such a tiny, tiny thing, but it's often the case in sitcoms and in films, but everybody always seems to know the door number where somebody is staying. I've never once given my hotel door number to somebody else. Maybe Lilith gave it to Frasier in case he needed it to help her home after drinking, but the fact that Frasier could just walk straight up and get the right door, I'm overanalyzing it. It just amuses me that in sitcoms, particularly whenever somebody goes to a hotel room, for some reason, somebody they don't want to be there always seems to know where their room is. And Niles goes into the bathroom. They push the food cart in there from the room service, the breakfast. Frasier comes in, and he has decided to not resist temptation. And then the toilet flushes in the bathroom, and my first thought was game over. But actually, Lilith just said it's a faulty toilet. She went in. Niles had fallen asleep on the toilet. The high-stress situation triggering his narcolepsy. And then the room service person comes back with the ketchup Lilith had asked for. And he sees Frasier. And obviously he didn't say anything. That would be very unprofessional. But his response, his mannerisms, his facial expressions, I just absolutely loved the character in this. I thought he was fantastic. And Frasier then finds Niles. He sees Niles in the bathroom, and he storms out and then realizes he's in the bathrobe, so he comes back in. And then for a couple of minutes, we just have three psychologists all arguing and analysing, and it's a treat to see all of their minds working and theorising about what has happened, and they all have pretty valid arguments, and I rather enjoyed it. And I didn't like it when Lilith said to Frasier that if he had just given in to her the night before, they wouldn't be in this mess. So basically, if you'd slept with me, I wouldn't have slept with your brother. I don't love that as a concept, but nevertheless, there was some good to come out of this scenario because Lilith realizes that she's no longer as upset about her husband leaving her because she'd felt undesirable, and that's why she was mostly so distraught. And obviously, Niles had proven to her that that's not the case. And Niles was able to take a call about the divorce, and he didn't fall asleep. So that had helped him work through some issues as well. So, yes, they'd both basically betrayed Frasier, because nobody wants their ex-wife to sleep with their brother, and they don't want their brother to sleep with their ex-wife. But at least they both had some positive outcomes. Lilith goes into the bathroom and to give them some space, and there is a heartbreaking moment it was difficult to watch. And Niles says to Frasier, "Are we okay?" And Frasier says, "No, we're not." And there are a couple of seconds of silence as we, the viewer, are forced, I guess, to sit with that. It's a heavy, heavy moment. But then Frasier says, "But we will be." And it's still emotional, it's still challenging to watch, but that helped lift it just a tiny bit. Just a little bit. And the room service person comes back, and this is with Frasier's order of Eggs Benedict, because he asked for an order of it, not realising there was a plate of it in the bathroom. And of course, the room service person comes up, and Lilith's not there. It's now just Frasier and Niles. Goodness knows what he was thinking. And it was funny. It was a nice way to lift the mood back up. And then we end with Lilith sitting on the toilet with the lid down, eating her breakfast on the cart, and emptying what I can only think is half of the bottle of ketchup. And it was a nice way to end things. I love Lilith. I really love Lilith. And definitely watching this after watching that Cheers episode was a very bizarre experience, but a really great way to see how the characters developed. I often watch Frasier directly after watching Cheers, so I'm kind of used to seeing jumps in Frasier's character development. I often go back and forth with the character, but it would be very unusual for me to have watched a Lilith Cheers episode and then directly watch a Lilith Frasier episode. In fact, I don't know if I've ever done that before. So that was a very interesting experience. Love the character, love the episode. Don't necessarily love some of the characters' behaviours, but in general, I thought it was pretty brilliant. Highlights would have to be absolutely Frasier saying "and good mental at the beginning of the episode. Really enjoyed that. And Lilith in general, absolutely love her. And the room service person, I thought they were fantastic. I absolutely loved them. It would have been a funny episode anyway, but those scenes in the hotel room were quite heavy. They were quite emotional, and there was comedy, but definitely quite heavy. But every time room service arrived, it just lifted everything back up, and it was perfect. Oh, and of course, Daphne and Martin running from Lilith. Slightly dramatic, but I loved it. And Eddie had a couple of cute moments. He rolled over. Well, he didn't. He rolled onto his back and kind of stayed there. And he ran away from Lilith as well, which was not a great moment for Lilith, but certainly Eddie was very cute. Needless to say, I think room service is a pretty great episode of Frasier.